Hey folks, Nick Jennison for Thinking About Guitar, and today we're going to be talking about this set of Fishman Fluence Classic humbuckers that I've loaded into my PRS McCarty 2, and we're going to be talking specifically about why these pickups are so misunderstood, and maybe dispelling the myth that Fluence pickups are just for metal. Now, of course, there's a reason why Fluence pickups are so popular in the metal world. I have a set of Devon Townsend humbuckers loaded into my CE24, which is located just over my shoulder. That's my designated metal guitar. I play it on tour, use it for the heavy sounds. It works absolutely beautifully, but I was a little apprehensive about putting a set of classics into this McCarty 2. It's a very valuable guitar, and as somebody who lives primarily in the rock, blues, fusion space, I was a bit concerned about an active pickup set, air quotes. Suffice to say, I shouldn't have been, but there are some tricks that we can use to bring these pickups closer to the sound that we expect from a classic PAF-style humbucker, while still retaining all that Fluence magic, such as the note separation, the clarity when you clean the volume control up, and of course the 3 voices for supreme tonal versatility. I'm going to talk to you about all those tricks in a second, but first, let's do a direct comparison between voice 1, which is the PAF-style humbucker on our Fluence-equipped guitar, against 2 other PAF-style guitars. We will notice some differences here because these guitars are not apples-to-apples comparisons, but they're kind of close enough to get the point across. We'll be taking a look at a PRS McCarty 594, which is loaded with 5815 LT pickups as standard, and my Maybach Convair 59 aged, which is loaded with amber pickups, Spirit of 59 PAF recreations. Don't be confused by the crazy covers. They are PAFs underneath there, and I think both sets of pickups sound absolutely killer and are great examples of the PAF archetype, but also they do sound slightly different to each other and slightly different to the stock Fluence sound. Now, all these guitars are loaded with 10 to 46 Diodario balanced tension MYXLs. We've got a fresh set on each of them. Let's take a listen to those guitars played back to back, clean and dirty, and then come back and talk some more about what you might be hearing and how you can bring those guitars closer to each other in terms of sound. Hey folks, editor Nick tuning in from the future. It turns out I recorded all the examples of those passive pickup guitars with my buffer switched off, which means it was going through about 100 foot of guitar cable, which made the tone pretty dark. So I guess we're just going to have to redo them. But for reference, the buffer off sounds like this, and the buffer on sounds like this. So for all the examples, we'll be running through the buffer switched on so that the pickups aren't loaded by all of that cable. Anyway, on with the show. Now, the observation that you may have made, which most folks do when they play a Fluence set for the first time, is that the Fluences are very bright in comparison to the PAFs. Now, PAFs are already bright-sounding humbuckers, but the Fluences seem to have a little something extra going on, and this is where our first little trick comes in. Now, there is a feature that most people don't use on their Fluence Classics that I'm going to encourage you, as a classic player, to explore, which is the high-frequency tilt. Now, this is wired onto a pad on the back of the pickups. You can wire it to a switch, which I've done on my tone control. Down here, I have this 3-way toggle for switching between the voices. There's my tone control for the high frequency tilt. What this does is it changes the high frequency response of the pickups in a way that Fishman describe as like having a long cable. I personally don't think that's an accurate description. For me, this brings the pickups a little more into that passive domain. And I always think about it as kind of like a Fluence off-on switch. Now, I happen to like the extra brightness that the Fluences impart, that extra kind of magic high end that helps me clear a mix. It also sounds fantastic for modern sounds, for sparkly clean tones, but for that classic PAF sound, if we pop this high frequency tilt, it brings this guitar way closer to the sound of those classic PAF-style humbuckers and also to the response of those classic PAF-style humbuckers. Let's engage the high frequency tilt and do that comparison one more time, and you'll hear how much closer this sounds to our other two test guitars. Now, one of the big selling points of Fluence pickups is that they're multi-voice, and this gives us access to not just the classic PAF tones that we've been listening to, but we also have access to a hot 70s style humbucker, which is maybe in the domain of a JB or a super distortion, but with some frequency optimizations thanks to the Fluence design. But we also have voice 3 with a classic single coil sound. Now, stock with the high frequency tilt disengaged, this is quite a bright and modern sounding single coil that's really useful in a lot of circumstances. However, don't forget, we also have access to the high frequency tilt, which brings this pickup much closer to the sound of a classic PAF or single coil style humbucker, depending upon which voice you're in. Now, to this end, we're going to do a comparison between the single coil voice with the high frequency tilt engaged and disengaged, and we'll compare that against my PRS Silver Sky and also against the 594 with the coil split engaged. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. Another area of concern for players like myself is how well Fluence pickups handle fuzz sounds, specifically classic fuzz designs that maybe don't like a buffered input and maybe start to get a little bit upset. If you've ever plugged a set of Fluence Classics into one of these fuzz pedals, you may have been disappointed with the results. However, once again, the high frequency tilt comes to our rescue. To this end, let's compare the sound of Voice 1, which is the classic PAF-style humbucker, against our 594 plugged into a classic tone bender style fuzz, and then we'll engage and disengage the high frequency tilt. You will hear how much better the fuzz behaves with this high frequency tilt pulled. Let's take a listen. So the high frequency tilt's kind of been the star of the show so far, and for me, this is a bit of a secret weapon with these pickups that essentially gives us a Fluence on-off switch. With it disengaged, we get all of that beautiful Fluence high end and clarity. With it engaged, we bring the guitar back down to earth. It sounds much more like a classic passive style pickup. It really is kind of the best of both worlds. But another area of pickup behavior that is very important to us as classic players is the cleanup. So to this end, we're going to go to a gold panel British style amp. We're going to compare how well our Fluence guitar cleans up against our 594 test guitar. Now, speaking of interaction with the amplifier, one of the big concerns that a lot of players living in the rock, blues, etc. space have when it comes to pickups that involve power is dynamics, because of course our playing dynamics are valuable to us, and you may have played some older style active circuits that just take all of your playing dynamics and crush them, just brings everything up to 127, there are no dynamics anymore, every note sounds the same. That is definitely not the case with these pickups. These respond exactly the way you would expect them to. So to that end, we're going to do a dynamic comparison on an edge-of-breakup type tone between my McCarty 594 and this McCarty 2 with the Fluence humbuckers. We're going to start with the high frequency tilt engaged so you can get an apples to apples comparison, but then I'll pop it back in and show you that this dynamic response is still there with all of those extra highs too, which is a really great additional bonus sound. Super, super useful. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. And while we're on the subject, we might as well take a listen to what happens when we push the classics in the opposite direction, i.e. how do they hang in a high gain metal kind of context. Now to this end, I have my favorite hot bridge pickup in this PRS Custom 22. It's a Bulldog Black Label. I think it sounds absolutely killer. I'm going to compare that to the sound of the Hot Voice 2 on our Fluence Classics with the high frequency tilt engaged and disengaged, and we'll see how well the classics hang for some heavy riffs and some high gain leads. So there you go, folks. That's been a look at the Fishman Fluence Classic humbucker set, and hopefully we've been successful in dispelling a few myths and a few concerns that you may have about these killer sounding pickups. Now, it's very difficult to try this stuff in person because even if you can find a guitar that's loaded with these pickups, it probably won't have the high frequency tilt wired in for one thing, but even then it's difficult to make direct back-to-back apples to apples comparisons because the guitar is changing, you may not have access to a similar guitar, etc. Even in this test, we're not using the same guitar because, man, it would take forever. I'd have to change the pots, I'd have to change the pickups, the jack socket. It's a whole big deal. So for me, I felt compelled to make this video to share my experiences with these pickups and some discoveries that I've made when comparing it to my PAF-equipped guitars, but also kind of have a little reference for myself so I can kind of prove to myself that yes, this does sound pretty similar and I am hearing what I think I'm hearing, but also to share that with you guys. So once again, this has been a look at the Fishman Fluence Classic humbuckers, some of the tips and tricks that I've discovered over the past few years. My name's Jennison for Thinking About Guitar. I'll see you again very soon.